Neuro Creatives Podcast with Josh Crafford.
One label of success doesn't define you. One skill set doesn't define you. You're much more than that, right? And I think that's our thing, is how do we create that inclusive environment in our homes and in our workplaces? That's my passion, is apart from earning a paycheck and just driving a good car and living in a good house, which we all want to do, and having a good family life, is that how are we making world a better place? I'll make sure is that the team that I lead or the team that I'm part of, I'm going to be that leader. I'm going to be that individual where I can create a safe space that's going to be contagious to this other individual. So then an intern joining us feels like, you know what? I feel very comfortable asking for a leave. I feel very comfortable sharing my weaknesses. And I think that's not a panacea. I think that's a goal that we can achieve.
Welcome to the Neuro Creatives Podcast with your neurodivergent host, Josh Crafford. This is a positive podcast where we believe in no judgment of self and of others. We remove the societal stigmas of can't and don't by focusing on strengths, mental wellness, and empowerment. Together, we are building a culture of safety and inclusion where no one has to mask. Hello, and welcome to the Neuro Creatives Podcast. I'm so excited to have with me today Kamal Pradhan. Did I get that right? I want to make sure.
Yes, Josh,
okay,
you did great.
I know the Kamal part because we know each other. We share a little bit of history. You and I both had the privilege and honor of being keynote speakers at the same conference. And I spoke about neurodiversity and inclusion. And there was some connection points there where we had talked not just at break, but even afterwards at the mixer for quite a while, and had a phenomenal conversation where we kept in touch, and now here we are. So do you mind taking a minute and just introducing yourself, tell a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So I'll kind of go a few years back. Don't want to reveal my age, but it's been like, 21 plus years when I first moved to US. Originally born and raised in Nepal, and I came here for my undergrad, especially around electrical engineering. Graduated around the recession, so you know the deal. Luckily, I had a few computer science courses that really helped me at least embrace other options. And over time, I took a lot of the HR projects, not by choice, by compulsion in the beginning, but then I started to enjoy those. Over the last 15 years, doing multiple HR related work, I feel comfortable saying I'm an HR practitioner in a lot of ways. So that's kind of been a journey where I don't consider myself an engineer anymore, right? So it's just that whatever you study doesn't define you. What you do and what you really follow. I don't want to use the word passion. It's sometimes really cliche. It's just like you do what you love, and there are days where you're not a big fan of what you do, but end of the day, when you sum it all up, and HR is really that one area where I felt like, no, this is home for me in a way where I think I can help and contribute from my end. So that's been the journey so far. I'm working as a HR professional for a healthcare company right now. And I want to go back to you, Josh, for a second, right? We met at the conference. It's like you meet a lot of people, nothing new about it, but what connects two different people from two different states, different backgrounds. And it was like our candid conversation. How it started was with you talking about neurodiversity and all of that. And it's like, I had to admit that I didn't know enough. And you kind of opened the door for me and a lot of the people. And I was really amazed that in corporate society today, someone's being ready to be vulnerable first. And the intent is to not have the spotlight on them to be popular, but to really share the awareness. And how do we make an inclusive environment for other folks who have these, I like to call, not all of them are superpowers, but some of them are, right? So I think that really caught my attention, and I really followed your story, which is beautiful. So hopefully you have links to those videos. But that was our candid conversation, and then that led to a few things I share with you about my personal life and my family and stuff. And And here we are 6, 7 months down the road. It's like, okay, let's do something to bring this awareness further and kind of share, just have a very organic conversation. So that's pretty much about me, Josh.
I appreciate you sharing your bio and the HR technology operations. You've worked in a ton of different organizations or backgrounds like agriculture, government, energy, high tech, entertainment, now, like you said, healthcare. A couple other things that caught my eye: practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So back in college, I'm not going to age myself either, but this is when Royce Gracie was first coming out with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the UFC had just started. There weren't weight classes. I was in Hawaii for my undergrad, and the person that was instructing my roommate and I out of his garage was a security guard that we had met through the university, but previously he was the hand-to-hand combat trainer for the military. So he had an extensive background, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was one of them. That was a fantastic time, and I absolutely loved the sport. So are you still practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
So until about last year, I was. Now I'm still now getting ready to re-enroll with my son. I love, so I'm going to go back to Hoist. So I remember like the whole history and how UFC came to life. There's much for contribution from the Brazilian community, right? Especially Vale Tudo tournaments and Helio. And there's a lineage of all these practitioners. And Hoist dominated the sport for a few years. And then it evolved to something much more bigger that we see today. And I'll share a personal story in terms of, so I watched UFC, it was like, I didn't know the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu part of it. There was MMA, mixed martial arts, there's Muay Thai, there's all these different arts all lumped together. So that was just, for me, it was like UFC, it's a fighting game. I was based out of Kansas City at the time in this early 2015, 2016. And I did deal with a little bit of anxiety over time in my life, and always been like into outdoor activities, and that helped me. But I was like, you know what? It's winter. What do I do? Like, I don't want to go out. And as you're just stopping at a stoplight, and I saw this white ad, like a plastic cardboard with saying, here's a number for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu if you want to enroll. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to give it a try. No idea what I was getting into. And then the first time I got into this place, I have to tell you, I almost threw up. And that went on for a month. It was that bad. And you can relate. Anybody who's, who hasn't tried jiu-jitsu, like if you have a wrestling background, maybe you have an edge. So that's how it started.
Okay, so the almost throwing up was because of the level of physical activity that it takes. Is that correct?
Yes, it was the level of physical activity. And there was part of the mental side that you couldn't get your mind off of the present, and it was very different because you play soccer, you kick the ball, you relax. This is like, if you just get distracted for 5 seconds, someone's going to choke you out.
Half a second.
Half a second, right? And it was a very different sport. And over time, so I did it for 5+ years. The furthest I could go was the blue belt. And it's a process of its own. It's a life of its own, And so it's hard to explain to somebody who hasn't gone through anxiety, because it's very similar to the neurodiversity, right? To somebody who has any of these superpowers or these conditions, I would say, right? It's hard to comprehend if you don't have that. So it's almost like this was kind of a remedy to address some of the mental and physical aspects to make life better.
I've tried explaining anxiety to friends that don't have it, and it's, if you've ever been stuck in an elevator, or even as kids, maybe when you have to turn the lights off and then go and walk in a very dark house and you're like, oh, it's a little bit spooky. It's like you know that you're safe. You know that there's no one else in the house, but just walking around in the dark sometimes it can be a little anxiety, that feeling, or even a roller coaster. But it's not when you're on a roller coaster, or it's not if you've ever been stuck in an elevator or felt claustrophobic, or if you've ever been driving and all of a sudden you have to kind of slam on your brakes and you're like, oh boy, ah. It's that feeling without having to slam on your brakes. It just hits you. Some of the ground rules here are yes and, so just play off of that.
Definitely. I didn't have much more to add. I would just say that It's almost like a fear of fear itself. It's anticipation of something that might happen. Doesn't happen 99% of the time, but you're just worried. You could have studied the best possible way, but the idea of an exam or taking a test terrifies you. And that is the anxiety, that's the feeling, right? So I think that it's okay to have that. And the way we're freely talking about this is to create an environment where you can have a conversation without worrying. You can kind of have a very open, candid conversation around weaknesses and fear, knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And this is also the part of life that we live in, and not just your education defines you or what you do defines you, right? All these things are part of what makes you whole. So I'm going all out, basically. It's the UFC in a way here, right? We're bringing everything together.
Yeah. Yeah. All styles. Everything's welcome.
Exactly.
So in Hawaii, when I was studying, and I'm not a big guy, I literally got my annual physical today. I'm 178 pounds. I'm 6'1". But I was in Hawaii, so we were going up against Samoans that were 250 pounds. There was a Samoan powerlifting team that everybody on it could bench 500 pounds, and these guys were just enormous. And our sensei, our instructor, was like, look, you're quick and you're smart. This is as much or more of a chess match than it is physicality of brute strength. And I love one of the first things he taught me was get in a pushing contest with these guys, because then you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to cream you. And so they'd push, and that's when you pull them and you just turn and you put your leg out, and you use their momentum. And that's using momentum and your strengths and knowing your strengths and your abilities and your challenges. In that situation, my challenges, they outweigh me by 80 pounds, and it's all muscle. And I could never beat them. And we'd go for 5 minutes, 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And yeah, I was exhausted at the end of it. But rarely could they beat me as well. And I was like, ooh, I knew if you were a little bit less strong and you couldn't just completely get out of this armbar or whatever it was, it's like, I would have had you. And I could get into the flow state as well. And that rarely happens. Sports was one of the things. School, I could never get into the flow state. Sports, I could. And like you said, I played football, American football. You have your part and you do it, or if the ball's not tossed to you or in your direction, you're kind of not in it. But with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I was waiting for that half a second mess up where they stick out an arm, their neck, their leg. And that's exactly what I would go for. And I could remember, I felt like I could do this with my eyes closed because I could just sense. Yep. My senses were so awakened that I knew where every part of their body was when we were right in it up against each other. Yeah, I miss it.
Well, I mean, I love, I think that's one thing we hadn't talked about when we first met, right? And it's just like, there's always like, when you talk to a fellow human being, like you could say that you could probably like, you're 10 degrees apart, you have nothing in common. As you start talking, there's like tons of things actually. But one thing I did want to go back about this jiu-jitsu piece that I wanted to highlight here, it was so inclusive. Like you said, right? You could be anybody. You could be a 100-pound guy. You could be a cop. You could be a wrestler, whatever. Like when you're on the mat, there's a level of respect. There's an inclusion where we're all learning this art together, and end of this role, end of this session, we're all going to have a good time, and we're going to be breathing really well, sweating like pigs. That's the nasty part. But after you got done with their exercise, it was so therapeutic. And it also taught me, like every time I would take that lesson, and the biggest lesson, Josh, I have to share this, is about failure. I don't think there are other sports like a soccer where you lose one game and then you lose. So every sport teaches you that, but I think jiu-jitsu, especially, you don't have an advantage. So I'm a shorter guy. I'm not 6'1". I'm probably like closer to 5'7", 5'8", and 160. I could go against you and knowing that I'll lose. And then next time I'll look for that 5-second or 2-second edge. But 99 times out of 100, I'll probably lose. I'll fail. But then I'll keep learning. And it's that beautiful lesson, that I think in the mainstream, all we're talking about is how do you get rich overnight? How do you
Mm.
become successful? What are the 5 different things you can do to be productive and to be, it's like if you can't talk about failure, then you're not living a good life. And I
Yeah.
think that's one thing I love about that sport. Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so Divergent are set up, you get 100 or you don't. And it is that you are graded, judged, stereotyped, everything about your identity from what 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock or whatever your school hours are is about getting things as perfect to 100 as you can get on tests. And for me, part of my talk and what we had kind of shared and talked about afterwards as well was I shared my GPA. I'd share this on stage as a corporate learning leader. My GPA at the end of my freshman year was a 1.9. And I had super glued my high school science teacher to his stool as an April Fool's Day prank. And luckily, after he found out that it was me, I actually turned myself in to protect the whole class from getting grounded. Instead of just expelling me, he gave me 2 options and put my fate into my own hands. So I'm very grateful for him doing that. But it also was the first time that I felt like a failure because I took it too far and I upset him and I ruined his favorite pair of corduroy pants. um,
Love it.
but that was the first time I didn't feel like a failure based on my GPA or my grades because I was busting my butt to try and get C's and B's. And he pointed out leadership and creativity, which those don't show up on a report card, but they show up in so many other ways. And he kind of put it out there to let me know, look, school is this one short part of your life. Once you're outside of school, everything that you struggled with, I'm paraphrasing, but everything that you struggled with and you failed at is going to make you that much stronger later on and that much more successful later on. And all those students that kept getting 100s, 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 or A in life and in corporate world, they're going to fail a lot and they're not going to know how to handle it. And you're just going to breeze right by them because you're like, oh, been there, done that.
Absolutely. And I think Josh, like let's pause on this comment about the grades, right? As in life, I know that we all have to pass our driving test. That's the law of the land, wherever you go. They're not gonna say you're gonna have to drive like an F1 racer. You just need to drive better than a monkey, and not kill anybody, hurt anyone, and also save yourself. Then you get your driver's license. I'm gonna ask you a fundamental question: is like, do we ever question our parents, our loved ones, our friends to say, hey, what was your grade? Based on that, I'm going to treat you different.
No.
So there's the answer. Yes, there's a material world that you have to do a little bit better if you want to earn more and all. But even that's been questioned. But other than that, I think it's all about the not just the leadership, it's about how you carry yourself and how you create a world around you, authentic one, not a perfect one, and having these relationships. And I think that's where the school systems are definitely not teaching that. They're teaching the raise your hand if you want to go to the bathroom. Okay, that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. But it's like raise your hand where you feel like you could be creative, you could do something different, even though you might not get the A's and the hundreds every time. Are we teaching kids to be comfortable?
Yeah. You hit on two things. One I want to touch on is the raising your hand, because I did a coaching mentoring session earlier this morning with someone that's going into a leadership program. It's like a 2-year rotational leadership program. And the advice that I had given was, as soon as they ask for a volunteer, raise your hand. You don't even need to know what it is, but they're not going to set you up for failure. They want you to succeed, and it's going to be difficult. Also, meet as many different people as you can in senior leaders and get as many different mentors in different areas. So even if like you're going into finance or marketing or operations or accounting, get a mentor in each of those areas that when they're speaking or introducing themselves or talking amongst everybody, someone's going to say something that resonates to you on a personal level. And regardless of if they're not in the same function, a ton of people make the mistake of, oh, they're not in my function, so I'm not going to meet with them. No, you want to, hey, when you said this about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm like, ooh, I'm there. The other comment that I wanted to make was, so you raise your hand and it's, oh, you're going to present to our CEO in 2 weeks. And you're like, oh crap, what did I do? It's like, guess what? Every single year, someone has to present to our CEO in 2 weeks from this group. And every single year, that person has things that they wish that they did better, but everybody else wishes that they were the person that, even if you mess up, everybody else wishes that they were you, because you're going to learn from it. And our CEO knows that you're not a professional presenter, you're nervous, but you had the guts and the grit to be able to say, yeah, I want to be put in that uncomfortable situation, test me in that way. The other thing that I want to touch on, and when we were talking about school and grades, I used to argue with my teachers, even in elementary school, because I have dyscalculia as well, which is like dyslexia with numbers. I'm like, look, I'm not going to need to know how to do long division. I will always have a calculator accessible. So I did fail freshman algebra in high school, algebra 1, and I had to retake it as a junior. But later on, and this was a comment that you and I had talked about, because when I was giving my keynote, I had said, look, I have dyslexia, ADHD, dyscalculia, and high anxiety, but I also ran a $2 billion portfolio at GE Capital as a credit risk manager. And you had made a comment that, wow, when you say those two things that are on different ends of the spectrum together, wouldn't have really matched those two things up. Yeah, you remember that?
Yeah, and I definitely do. And I think that when someone's presenting, until you get the full story, you make a story from your end. So if you're presenting to me and you're saying, I'm going to be presenting about neurodiversity or some kind of attribute, I use the word attributed with the right intent, is that I'm going to have preconceived notion to say, okay, he's going to talk about X, Y, and Z. But as you start speaking, you're going to help me uncover that, yes, you do have that. And then, like the way you said, is you manage a $2 billion portfolio to say, you know what, you gave me a story of triumph. And it didn't have to be 2 billion. If you had just said, you know what, I passed high school, that would have been just as important story to say, you know what, you crossed that finish line with all the doubts you had, right? And I want to go back to the CEO story you mentioned. My academic career has been not as, I would say, full of struggle as you had, but it had its fair share, meaning I was never one of the top students, and I was like the average one. And every time I would compare with the top students in the class who were my good friends, and I would say there's nothing that is amazingly different about this person than I did. But it was like the brand that they carried was the differentiator. So same essays that they would write and I would write, if I just put their name, the teacher would just first look at, oh, you know what, it's from this top student. So over time, that self-doubt that I had mine, I was like, I had two options. Continue to really work crazy hard, but still have self-doubt. The other one is to say, you know what, I just don't have it in me. I went with the first one. I don't know if it was a smart move, but it was like, I'm going to go crazy in everything that I do, regardless of the outcome. And then it was also like a realization to say, you know what, I'm not that smart. So I always have to work hard. Like I don't have any other option. And so I think that thought process took me further. Fast forward like years later, someone did ask us to present to the company about what are the innovative ideas for us to succeed further. I didn't raise my hand like your class. And since nobody did, I raised my hand finally. And the idea was like each department had to present their business case and what could help the company. And fast forward few months, I got selected among 300 other participants in this global company. And then fast forward, it went down to like 5 finalists. And then I got to present to the CEO with a third prize. And it was like, you know what? I never even thought of raising the hand in the first place. And here I am. And it kind of like gave an idea that you only get results if you take a chance. And if you take a chance on yourself. And when I say this is not like a cliche, right? It's like, even if it's a simple thing, to your point, just raise your hand and be embarrassed. Like be good at being embarrassed. And over time, you'll be really, really, really better.
Yeah. people will remember you. And I was talking with someone else that does a lot of public speaking, and he gets nervous and he sweats, and he's like, look, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to have my handkerchief with me, and I'm going to constantly be dabbing my forehead because I sweat. If I was up there, I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sweaty, then you're giving people the opportunity to look at you differently. But if you're confident, you're like, yeah, so what? I sweat. I'm still up here doing it. But yeah, I'm going to dab my forehead. I'm going to keep going. I was reading through someone's bio and I was stumbling because I'm dyslexic. And they're like, you know what? Let me just tell you about myself. And they took over. I'm like, cool, thanks. Do that. And I was like, oh, I feel so bad, internally. And I have beat myself up a lot. So I love this message that you're saying. But if you're like, yeah, you know what? That's me. I tried it. I stumbled through it. There is no such thing as perfection. Yes, you can get 100 on a test, but still, that doesn't mean that you have a PhD in that. And I've talked to hundreds of PhDs that are still studying. Learning never ends. My kids did martial art called Subukdo, which predates Taekwondo, and they have a midnight blue belt. They don't have a black belt because you can't ever achieve that level of mastery.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that type of philosophy I love, and it has proven itself again and again and again. And one of the things I teach is leadership development skills for Fortune 200 companies, at multiple Fortune 200 companies. And it's everything that I have learned how to survive as a neurodivergent person that everybody was like, oh, this is great. This is great. Teach me more. Teach me more. And I'm like, this, it feels like cheating to me because I'm just taking my lived experiences that I had to figure out on my own in order to succeed, that other people are like, these are the things that don't get taught in school because it's like they don't really teach leadership and creative thinking.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't teach how to be embarrassed, right? You can't teach how to be embarrassed. You should be teaching how to be comfortable with being vulnerable. Nobody, comes, obviously there are a few folks, but you're not a savant as you're born, We're all, like you said, it's in the school of life, you learn things every step of the way. And some things you get really good at and you say, you know what, I'm going to make this my profession. So that then gives you the bread and butter. But then life becomes boring. So you have to keep learning new things for fun, to explore other sides of you. I think actors are a really good example, Josh. And I say that, right, because I watch a lot of slow movies and then there's this fun movies. But overall, when I look at these actors and directors, they have a skill that's bankable. They make a movie that could do really well or could be an utter flop, and then they're out of a job. So here we're saying that you have the best skill, you're really good looking and you can do the action scenes and you can dance, whatnot. And then you're out of a job next day once that movie is done. Now you have to re-navigate, relearn every movie you're playing. And on top of that, all the things you learned are not enough because now you're so popular, you can't eat out in the street openly. You have to learn to be away from the crowd. Now you have to teach the same skills to your family and your kids because you're so popular that now they can't do things openly, right? So I'm like thinking, how resilient do they have to be? How flexible to learning do they have to be? And I feel that it's not just the movie we should look at. It's about the individuals, and then how do we bring that to us? Because all of those, lessons you teach, the lessons that we see in the screen, you take some of it and say, you know what, how can I apply it? And I'm not saying you have to learn every single day. That's a bore, right? You just learn when things are fun and you stop, take a pause, and learn again. But I think that you give yourself enough credit to create a world where you thrive. And I think that's what we got to be teaching our kids, our younger ones, right? To say one label of success doesn't define you, one skill set doesn't define you. You're much more than that, right? And I think that's our theme, is how do we create that inclusive environment in our homes and in our workplaces? And that's my passion. is apart from earning a paycheck and just driving a good car and living in a good house, which we all want to do, and having a good family life, is that how are we making world a better place? Because not all of us are physicians, not all of us are engineers, even though I kind of went for that. But but I think these are the mini contributions that, what I'll make sure is that the team that I lead or the team that I'm part of, I'm going to be the leader. I'm going to be that individual where I can create a safe space that's going to be contagious to this other individual. And we all kind of do that. So then a month from now, a year from now, an intern joining us feels like, you know what? I feel very comfortable asking for a leave. I feel very comfortable sharing my weaknesses. And I think that's not a panacea. I think that's a goal that we can achieve.
You have a line that you've used, and I've heard you use it, and I love it. And I think it ties into this. It's empathy with action. Can you talk about that?
Yes. And this was something that, I didn't sit under the apple tree and come up with it. It was something I was kind of just, it came in the flow. And I think it's natural. And what I mean by empathy with action is that I could tell my son, I really love you. And if he falls and hurts his eyes, like, oh, you know what? That's sad. You must be hurt. I could say that. But what am I doing? What am I doing more than that? If I'm saying I love you, that's great. Am I making time for him? So is there an action that follows that? Because words, you can throw words all over the place.
Yeah. And this is so what made me think of that when you were saying I create a safe space and place for my employees to be able to be vulnerable, to be able to make mistakes, to be able to learn and grow together. That to me is kind of that empathy with action. That's kind of where I was going from the corporate side of
Exactly.
it as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this, I started with the family side, right? But I think, you're right on. In a work environment, we keep hearing this as people leave bad managers, people leave
Oh
bad
yeah.
leaders, right?
100%.
And what we lack today, that's a whole different podcast, Josh, is that no one trains middle managers. They only expect of them. There's nothing been done. But it's creating this ripple effect is that the way I bring myself to work and the way I create that environment, that person who's reporting to me or working with me, it has a profound impact in their life too, because they're spending 40 hours a week with me. I'm spending the same time, right? So I think that if they're going through things and if they say, you know what, I need to leave early, I've got a house inspection, we're buying a new home, or I got to take care of a puppy. And these happens quite a bit, right? To say, I'm not going to say the name, right? But it did happen with my team members. Like, I've got an emergency. All of a sudden, I was in the office and this person came to me and was like, so I really thought it was probably a big deal. And it was a dog giving birth to a litter. And for this person, it was really an emergency, right? Because this person wanted to be there. I'm like, you should go, and we'll take care of it, the
Yeah.
work. And it's like, so I was empathetic, but had I not given that space to let this person express and also be able to take that few hours off,
Yeah.
now I've set the stage. And so that's an example. I wasn't planning on sharing that particular example, but it says that these things happen. You don't have to make things up.
Yeah, this is free flow. Oh, yeah, and definitely don't make anything. But these are our lived experiences, right? So, and we have hundreds of them. Everybody has hundreds of them. It's just, and what I'm hoping, is you're sharing your story and someone's like, oh, that happened with me, or I can connect with that, or I thought I was alone. And to build a community of people that either are empathetic leaders that haven't heard other empathetic leaders, because that's not always the leadership style that different corporations want, but it is the best leadership style. Because it's, if you have a boss that is just, hey, you have to do this because I say so, that's not a leader, that's a boss, and you only do it because they say so. A leader is someone that says, hey, can you do this? And you do it because you respect them and you will follow them because they are a leader, and you lead through empathy, not through titles.
Absolutely, yeah. And I feel that, you talked about like my journey, right? It's like I've worked through a variety of industries, And if you ask me, what's so special? What was that special sauce that probably was an industry? Was it a company? If you ask me that, I'll just say, what the special sauce is? It's all about the people
Mm.
across all these entities. It was just the best thing I remember is the human experiences, like a baby shower activity for me that was thrown by my colleagues and another person. Now, every time we think about the birthday, we're like, oh, you know what? Our kids aren't too apart because when we were working together, the team really threw that baby. That's what you remember. You don't remember the earnings for that period. You don't remember exactly the X%. Some people do, if it was terrible, but you don't remember like
Yeah.
the salary amount, obviously. So I think that the human experience is in the center of everything we do. And our goal should be, regardless of how smart you are, how wealthy you are, or how perfect you are, if you don't have this humility to treat this other person, regardless of the race, ethnicity, neurodivergence, anything, that's a lesson that you have failed and you have an opportunity to learn.
Yeah, 100%. Like you said, people leave bad bosses. And the number one reason why people leave companies is because they're leaving their boss. And there's a quote, and I'm gonna misquote because I don't have it in front of me, but Maya Angelou said, "People don't remember what you said; they remember how you made them feel." And that's kind of relates to what you were saying as far as, they're not going to remember exactly what the earnings were or what the exact grade was on this project, but they'll remember the late nights, the pizzas, the celebrating, the whatever it is that you're doing as humans and accepting everybody. You had brought up that you grew up in Nepal. If people are from Nepal or I've never been there, anything to add to that message that are here now or want to come here?
Well, thank you for opening the conversation up. The way I look at life is going to be a little bit different from the way you look at your life, right? Because the reality is I came from a different culture, and Nepal, like, I'm biased, but is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. And every time I fly back, I can say by nature, the hills, the mountains, the Everest, and the lakes, the glaciers, there's so much, but more than that, the different varieties of food, organic, filled with flavor, and then the hospitality of like treat every guest as a god. And that's all there. And that's the culture that I grew up in. But I also grew up in a culture that was very behind in terms of the technological revolution, access to a lot of the tools that measure if you do have any kind of the attributes from neurodivergence and things like that, right? There's also a stigma, and I'm sure it's gotten better now. Of we're having a very open conversation here, and there's still a stigma here. But imagine this, where there's lack of awareness of even the coin itself. So people are struggling exactly what they have, let alone. So I think that it's a culture very rich, but there's obviously a lot of weaknesses. And then coming from that culture here, there's always a shock thanks to MTV and the different movies, TNT channels. Like I watched the westerns. I did watch a lot of the movies, and then obviously I can't leave Friends out. And for people, especially, and not just from Nepal, for any international, I would say, um, individual who come here, for the first few years, you get lost. You're learning the new culture. So you're trying to find a place. And at some point, right, you make decisions, you make choices that you have to abide by a long time. Then comes this part that we're talking about is this part of inclusion, is that the human nature is that you want to be part of a social group and you bring some to the table, but the longing is that if I'm sitting next to you waiting for a bus, I want to have a conversation. I want to be treated as equally. And then it's my obligation to also treat you as equally. So I think that for those individuals who are listening, regardless of what shortcomings you have and you're here, right? I think that the message is there are other podcasts like this. Obviously, Josh, you're doing a great job here, but is to raise your hand. You got to start by raising your hand. I can tell you 10 different amendments and things, but no, just raise your hand and be comfortable with the disappointment. Because if you don't, nobody puts you in a microscope and can tell you exactly what you're going through because your struggles are your own and no one else can comprehend that. But if you raise your hand, that means now you're visible. That's the first step of you acknowledging you. And I think that's where you and I both align is it's that one thing we should teach ourselves and our kids and the next generation. And then we'll figure out the rest.
You had mentioned, how we raise and teach our kids. You and I have talked about two things off the air, but I want to kind of bring it up, if you're okay with it, is your outdoor time with your son intentionally, and then Star Wars with your son, if you want to go for those.
Oh, thanks.
Either of those, one of those.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the outdoor time, I think that, so I'll make it very personal as a dad, right? When especially when sons are born or even daughters, I can, but the first few years, the gift of motherhood, and obviously there's a lot of struggles and a lot of sacrifices mothers make, there's no doubt about it. But there's a sense of jealousy for dads because we don't have to offer a lot during the first 6 months from feeding the baby, and we just don't we can work towards it, right? But innately it's the biology of things. And so when my son was born, I was like, you know what, I want him to really be responsive towards me, more, and be attracted to me more. And it didn't happen. And it was like no one's teaching you about fatherhood. It's just you just kind of have to learn on the go. And after the first 2 years, as he started being more vocal, and then I realized, oh, now is my time to show up. And then we lived in Kansas City, so a little bit colder weather. But then when it was nice, right, you could go out. And so then I started taking for bike rides with the extra wheels, the training wheels and everything. So it was like such a fun way of bonding. It was a win-win for me because now he could truly see a father figure, a dad within a dad, and then not just, and it was like, I couldn't just ask for things. For everything in life, you have to work for it. You can't just have a child and just expect all this accolades and, things to come, right? So that was the outdoor bonding. And over time, we've kind of kept up with that. So I can proudly say he knows how to ride his bike well. He knows how to swim. He knows how to play soccer, right? So I'm just like, I can't teach him all, but I can be part of that process. And that's something I'll cherish for the rest of my life. So that was the outdoor piece, and that's beautiful for me. The other piece is the Star Wars thing was like, so we were expecting our second one, and he loved Star Wars in some way and form, but he still didn't have a very good grasp. But he loved the Stormtroopers, and he loved Darth Vader, and I was like, how do I get him to change that? And maybe, like not go towards the dark side, right? He was right around like closer to 5.5. So the plan was to go to Disney. The plan wasn't to go to Star Wars per se. It was like all of Disney. And it just turned out as a full Star Wars field trip. And he got to meet the Stormtroopers. So from there, then he wanted a Disney Plus subscription so he could watch all the stories and movies and stuff. But during this period, he had a hard time. Like he just didn't want to study, especially because the kids, they want to watch a video. Everything is like so visual and reading is a mundane thing. And I was like, okay, I still want to make sure he is able to read. So one day I was like, I'm going to turn the captions on and change the settings on the volume. And he's going to be forced to read. And he started that. You just don't plan for these things. That's the story I had shared with you. There's so many ways to learn. And that was something, it was funny in a way. It happened.
I love it. It's so simple and ingenious, but it's kind of that mashup of what do I need to accomplish and what is it that he's passionate about, or strengths that he has, and strengths and passions, at that age. So it might not be as much of a strength, but it's a passion that you can utilize. I love how you came across that and discovered it. And like you said, you can try a bunch of different things, and if it doesn't work, try something else. Not everything has to work. So if you probably tried several different things, and this was the one that really clicked, and I love it. So yeah, anybody that's listening, if you're trying to get your kids to read more, find their favorite show, turn on closed captions, and turn the volume way down.
Exactly. Turn the volume down or just have them pause and you can say, you know what, I know that you didn't catch the whole thing that person said, but when you pause it, you can read it. And they're like, okay, so it connects all the dots for
Yeah.
them. And it also enables, like, you really don't know what person is going through, like how good they're at listening versus reading. And I think that they will catch on, they'll pick what's the best way. And I feel that that's the thing. The other thing, Josh, that I wanted to kind of also, I know we're coming to a closer here, right? Is the inclusion piece and the learning piece, they are so inherently tied together. And as much as we think that, oh, you know what, I'm gonna learn from Josh or Maya Angelou, like with the nice books and really profound wisdom, some of the simplest form of learning in my mind is a simple conversation which turns to an aha moment. I keep going back to my son because every time I see him, like where I mess up, he forgives and forgets so soon, and that's the way that he's teaching me how to kind of forget that ego and stop holding grudges and just be very inclusive and accept. And I think that's the beauty of the learning and creating this and I feel that our obligation going forward is through podcasts, through our corporate career, through our professional, personal, right, is where we are, we're doing those small bits and pieces to create that environment. And I think that what you're doing is steps ahead because you don't see a lot of individuals promoting and trying to bring awareness. So I
Thank you. I
love the fact,
appreciate it.
Josh.
Part of my success is I find gaps. I'm good at identifying gaps. And if it's a gap that I'm interested in, I'm like, ooh, how can I fill that? So I think a lot of neurodivergent people are actually, I knew there's a neurodivergent people. So 40% of self-made millionaires are neurodivergent because either the corporate culture didn't accept them, they didn't fit in, everybody's tried to put into a box. And how you had said earlier, we need to grow, we need to learn, and we're passionate learners, and it's like go go go, do, because like you said as well, if we are not one of the smarter people in the room, we will become the hardest working person in the room. So we have that resilience, we have that grit, we have that different perspectives of how to figure stuff out in order to survive in this world. Because if anybody is neurodivergent and they've figured out how to get a degree and into a corporation, then they've already figured out how to be successful, right?
I want to go back to your last line, right? Is that when you say 40% of the millionaires are neurodivergent, so either they failed trying to get into corporate or the corporations failed them. So the
Yes.
common thing is failure. So basically, the more you can fail, the more the chances are you're going to succeed.
Yeah, I'm gonna name this podcast something around the success of failure. You know, it's like
Oh, that would be lovely, right? Because you and I have mentioned, like, are we successful, Josh? We don't know. I can't say I'm successful. Who am I to say that I'm successful? But I could at least say that I've tried and failed, and
yeah,
some things I did well, and I'm in
yeah.
this journey together. But what I can also say is that the success and failure doesn't define me.
I think that's the hard part because in school they clearly tell you what success is an A or success is a B, and depending on your parents and where you're from, it's like, oh no, success is a 95 or higher. And then you have these kids that are high anxiety, stressed out, committing suicide. It's like they haven't even had a chance to show their and demonstrated their strengths yet, that are they would be one of these self-made millionaires once they get out of school, if they're not mentally, emotionally damaged from what society says success is. Man, that's one of the messages, and that's one of the reasons why I do this, is because I have talked to so many coworkers that say my kid is dyslexic and the school system is telling them what they told me, that I might not graduate, or I need to go to a specialized school, or hey, good luck. And it's bull crap, and I need to make sure there are voices that are counteracting that, to say, no, 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 you're kid's going to be great. Your kid is going to be more successful than the kids that got easy A's by just memorizing answers, because guess what? Once you get into the working world, memorizing an answer is not going to get you far at all.
You asked me about Nepal and especially the culture there, right? I think over time it has evolved, but that's the old school, right? Old school is like you got to get your A's and be a physician or an engineer, and that's your way out. I would say just way out of the poverty. And I think that the message that you carry is so important, especially going forward, is that it's so good and easy for you and I to talk through just the inclusivity, like what actions are we taking? Yes, the first action we're taking is we're doing a podcast. So we are using our time to share this message, right? The other is now, I think that what you and I talked about is taking actions within our professional lives. I think that everything that we do, if we want that impact to be done, should be an action followed by it, especially in the context of learning and really creating the environment for the neurodivergent kids and the regular kids, the average kids, right? And even like the lesson is profound in terms of grades don't define you. You know, I think there's more ways of learning, and that leads to success. So I think this is beautiful, Josh. You know, and I commend you again. I think I have to say that so you do like 1,000 episodes.
Thank you. I hope so. Kamal, we have a closing tradition on this podcast where the previous guest gives me two random words, or random to us, some type of meaning to them, where your job is to creatively mash them together, combine them together to have some type of meaning with the topics that we're talking about here. And once again, no judgment of self, no judgment on others. Lollygag and echo.
In the world of corporate, with tons and tons of meetings, there are some meetings I lollygag my way throughout the entire meeting, and I try to echo my colleagues who are doing the same. So we're all on the same page. That's what I can tell you.
Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah. Perfect. Great job. So don't say yours on the air. I will get those from you. So if you want to email them to me or text them to me or whatever, but now you get an opportunity to have fun with the next guest, not knowing who the next guest is.
That's amazing.
just a fun little way. I have done this in classes as an icebreaker, but where we're all warmed up, you know, it's just a fun little way to close out the show. Did we have the opportunity to get to all the messages that you wanted to share, or in the stories and experiences that you wanted to share?
Definitely, yes. And I'll summarize this in last few things. As you asked me if there's any message from just the cultural background that I had and my experiences, and obviously the theme of inclusivity, you know, inclusivity to everybody. So I think to sum it up, you will never be heard if you don't raise your hand. So you did raise your hand, you didn't get heard. The probability increases with the attempts. So let's say you did raise your hand, you didn't get heard. What's next? And the next thing, and I'll kind of defer to this book by our current CEO, Carol Lynch, who wrote this book called Taking Up Space. And it really highlights her journey and as a female on how you didn't have a chair to sit on in one of those first meetings, right? And it's very profound because now you raised your hand, you got in through the door after multiple attempts, and now you still don't have a place to sit. You have no space. And this book, I'll just kind of take that as a opportunity to say, you need to take up your space. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, as long as you're inclusive and you're respectful, don't wait for anybody. You are your biggest cheerleader, coach, and the biggest fan that you could hope for. You know, so I think that's the message that I want to share as an individual. And I want to thank you for giving this opportunity to share my thoughts, but also having a very, I want to say, meaningful discussion on creating a better world. the song of what he called Michael Jackson and so many other artists of one love, right? One world. That's the theme. So those are the two things I wanted to say. But absolute pleasure, Josh, that I wasn't planning on this podcast when we first met, but now we're here.
Me either.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, Kamal. It has been a pleasure. I love your messages and your stories. So thank you for being vulnerable. And I think you demonstrated empathy with action by joining us here, sharing your stories, being open, being vulnerable, and showing what true leadership is. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh, and good luck.
Thank you so much for listening. You are honestly the reason that this podcast exists. If you'd like more information on today's guest, please see the show notes. Also, add a comment to let us know your thoughts. And please subscribe.